The bullet shattered bone. Crimson spread across Ryan Thompson's shoulder like spilled wine on white linen. His knees buckled, his vision blurred. But he didn't fall. 8-year-old Chloe Reed cowered in the shadows, her silk dress torn to ribbons, dark mascara painting rivers down porcelain cheeks. 3 armed men lay sprawled across the gleaming marble, their masks askew, their weapons silent. Ryan's faded police badge caught the strobing emergency lights as he pressed his bloodied palm against the wall for support. His weathered fingers trembled as he reached toward the terrified child. "You're safe, kid," he breathed, each word a struggle against the fire consuming his shoulder. His phone screen glowed with Tyler's sleeping face, his own 8-year-old boy waiting at home. This broken single father had no idea that one act of courage would weave 2 shattered families into something beautiful. Neither had dared to dream. 12 hours earlier, Ryan Thompson stared at the stack of overdue bills scattered across his kitchen table. The electric company's final notice sat on top, stamped in angry red letters. Beside it, Tyler's school permission slip for the field trip he couldn't afford. The coffee maker gurgled its last drops into a chipped mug that read, "World's Greatest Dad," a Father's Day gift from better times. Tyler's laughter drifted from the living room where he built elaborate Lego fortresses, blissfully unaware that their own fortress was crumbling. Ryan's fingers traced the worn edges of his wife's photograph, her smile frozen in amber light. 2 years since cancer had stolen her away, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone in their small apartment that smelled of mac and cheese and broken dreams. The security company had called that afternoon. Night shift position available immediately. $12 an hour watching empty office buildings while the city slept. Ryan's police pension barely covered rent, and Tyler needed new school clothes. The boy was growing faster than Ryan's paycheck could keep up. He'd folded the photograph carefully and slipped it into his wallet, next to his old police badge. Some nights, he still reached for his service weapon before remembering he was just a security guard now. The badge had lost its shine, but not its weight. It pressed against his chest like a reminder of who he used to be, before bullets and blood and bureaucracy wore him down to nothing. Across town, Katherine Reed's manicured fingers flew across her laptop keyboard in the gleaming executive suite of Reed Technologies. The merger documents sprawled across her mahogany desk like fallen soldiers in a corporate war. Her assistant had left hours ago, but Katherine remained, fueled by determination and lukewarm coffee. The acquisition would secure her company's future, but the Dubai investors demanded signatures by morning. Chloe's babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, something about a family emergency that Katherine suspected was actually a date. Single motherhood meant making impossible choices between board meetings and bedtime stories. Tonight, the boardroom won. Chloe sat curled in the corner of her mother's office, surrounded by coloring books and stuffed animals. Her little fingers worked methodically with crayons, creating a family portrait where stick figures held hands under a rainbow. The unicorn backpack at her feet contained graham crackers, juice boxes, and dreams of a mother who came home before midnight. Katherine glanced up from her contracts, guilt gnawing at her chest like hunger. The divorce had left them both wounded, Chloe retreating into fantasy worlds while Katherine buried herself in balance sheets. The cleaning crew would arrive at midnight. Just 2 more hours, and they could go home to their empty penthouse where neither of them knew how to fill the silence. Ryan's first night at the Morrison building passed in comfortable monotony. He walked the marble hallways with practiced steps, checking doors and logging entries in his security report. The building housed 3 companies: an accounting firm, a law office, and Reed Technologies on the top floor. His flashlight beam cut through darkness thick as velvet, illuminating oil paintings of stern-faced executives who seemed to judge him from their gilded frames. The elevator hummed its mechanical lullaby as he rode between floors, counting minutes until sunrise would reunite him with Tyler. His shoulder radio crackled with static, and the distant voice of the dispatcher checking in with various guards across the city. Everything was routine. Everything was safe. The first sign of trouble came at 11:47. The motion sensor on the 3rd floor triggered without cause. Ryan's training kicked in muscle memory from years of police work that civilian clothes couldn't erase. He climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, staying in the shadows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The accounting firm's glass doors stood open, but the lock showed no signs of damage. Professional work. Ryan unclipped his radio but hesitated. False alarms happened all the time. Motion sensors triggered by pigeons or loose papers caught in air conditioning drafts. But his instincts, honed by years of late-night patrol shifts, whispered warnings his logical mind wanted to ignore. The sound reached him first, Chloe's muffled scream from the executive floor above. Ryan's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his radio forgotten in his urgency to reach the source of terror. The elevator shaft echoed with male voices, harsh and commanding. Professional kidnappers, he realized with growing dread. They'd studied the building, knew the security patterns, understood exactly when to strike. His old police badge seemed to burn against his chest as he reached the top floor. Through the glass doors of Reed Technologies, he could see them 3 men in black tactical gear surrounding a small figure in a torn dress. Katherine had fought like a lioness protecting her cub. Her laptop lay shattered on the marble floor, papers scattered like confetti in the aftermath of violence. A thin line of blood traced from her temple where they'd struck her unconscious. She lay zip-tied behind her desk, her breathing shallow but steady. The men moved with military precision, one watching the elevators while another secured the exits. The 3rd man held Chloe, his gloved hand covering her mouth as tears poured down her cheeks. Ryan counted 3 weapons, assessed angles and distances, calculated odds that made his police academy instructors turn in their graves. He was outgunned, outmanned, and completely alone. But Tyler's face flashed in his mind, his boy who still believed his father was a hero, who wore Ryan's old police hat while playing cops and robbers in their cramped apartment. Some things mattered more than survival. Ryan slipped his badge from his wallet, pinning it to his security uniform with trembling fingers. The metal felt cold against his palm as he drew his backup weapon, the gun Katherine probably didn't know he carried. His hands were steady now, his breathing controlled. For the first time in 2 years, Detective Ryan Thompson was back on duty. The tactical entry came from the service corridor, bypassing the main doors they expected him to use. Ryan moved like smoke through shadows, using furniture and architectural columns for cover. The first gunman never saw him coming. A sleeper hold from behind, applied with the precision of someone who'd done this before. The man dropped silently, his weapon skittering across marble. The second turned at the sound, raising his rifle just as Ryan's shoulder caught him in the midsection. They went down together, grappling for control of the gun. The 3rd man shouted warnings, dragging Chloe toward the emergency exit. But Ryan was already moving, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. "Let her go!" Ryan's voice carried the authority of his former badge, the command presence that had once made hardened criminals surrender without firing a shot. The kidnapper spun toward him, weapon trained on Ryan's chest. Time stretched like taffy in the moments before violence. Chloe's eyes met Ryan's across the chaos, wide and trusting, and absolutely terrified. She reminded him of Tyler during thunderstorms, when lightning turned their apartment into a battlefield between light and shadow. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Ryan dove sideways, pushing Chloe behind a marble pillar just as the gunman's finger found the trigger. The bullet found its mark with surgical precision, tearing through Ryan's shoulder and spinning him like a broken compass. Pain exploded across his consciousness in waves of white-hot agony. But his own weapon was already firing, training overcoming trauma in the dance of violence he'd hoped never to perform again. The gunman staggered, dropped his rifle, clutched his leg where Ryan's shot had found its mark. Around them, the remaining kidnappers were down, one unconscious, one wounded, one slowly raising his hands in surrender as police sirens wailed in the distance below. Someone had triggered the silent alarm during the chaos. Ryan slumped against the marble pillar, his security uniform soaked crimson with his own blood. Chloe emerged from her hiding place like a butterfly from a cocoon, her designer dress torn, but her spirit intact. She knelt beside him with the careful precision of a child who'd watched too many medical dramas on television. Her small hands pressed against his wound with surprising competence. "The police are coming," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears. "You saved me, just like the heroes in my storybooks." Ryan's vision blurred, but he managed a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You're safe, kid," he breathed, each word a victory against the darkness creeping in at the edges of his consciousness. His phone buzzed with a text from Tyler's babysitter. A photo of his son fast asleep, clutching the stuffed dinosaur Ryan had won at a carnival during better times. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tonight, while saving someone else's child, he'd risked making his own boy an orphan. But as sirens grew louder and Chloe's small hand squeezed his fingers with fierce determination, Ryan understood that some choices transcended logic. Heroes weren't born in moments of convenience. 2 weeks later, Ryan Thompson sat in his hospital bed, his shoulder immobilized in a complex web of slings and bandages that made him look like a broken marionette. Tyler perched beside him on the narrow mattress, carefully coloring in a get-well card featuring stick-figure superheroes with capes that defied gravity. The boy had taken his father's injury with the resilient pragmatism of children who've already survived too much loss. Physical therapy would last months, the doctors explained. Full recovery was probable but not guaranteed. Ryan's security job was gone, of course. Nobody wanted a one-armed guard, no matter how heroic his credentials. The flowers arrived first, elaborate arrangements that transformed his sterile room into a botanical garden. Then came the fruit baskets, the get-well cards from strangers, and finally the reporters who wanted to interview the hero security guard for their feel-good segments. Ryan declined them all, uncomfortable with attention that felt undeserved. He'd simply done what any father would do when faced with a child in danger. The real heroes were the paramedics who'd kept him breathing, the surgeons who'd reconstructed his shattered shoulder, the nurses who checked on Tyler during visiting hours. But the city loved its stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Katherine Reed knocked softly before entering, her usually perfect composure replaced by something rawer and more human. She carried Chloe on her hip the first time Ryan had seen the little girl since that terrible night. Both had traded their formal business attire for jeans and sweaters that made them look like any mother and daughter visiting a friend. Chloe held a handmade card covered in glitter and crayon drawings of police badges. Her smile was shy but genuine, the kind of expression that made adult hearts skip beats. Katherine's eyes were red-rimmed with the exhaustion of someone who'd been crying privately for days. "I don't know how to thank you," Katherine began, her voice catching on words that felt inadequate against the magnitude of his sacrifice. Ryan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, acutely aware of his stubbled jaw and hospital gown that gaped at inappropriate angles. Tyler leaned against his father's good side, protective and curious about these strangers who'd somehow become part of their story. The conversation stumbled through pleasantries and gratitude, until Chloe slipped from her mother's arms and approached Tyler with the directness of children who haven't learned to navigate social complexities. Within minutes, they were comparing drawings and debating the relative merits of different superhero powers. The adults watched their children connect with the bemused wonder of parents realizing their own inadequacy at human connection. Katherine pulled a business card from her purse, then seemed to think better of it and tucked it away. "Chloe asks about you every day," she admitted quietly. "She calls you her guardian angel. I tried to explain that angels don't usually carry guns and bleed all over marble floors, but 8-year-olds have their own logic." Ryan laughed despite himself, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. The sound seemed to surprise Katherine, who smiled for the first time since entering his room. It transformed her face completely, erasing the corporate mask to reveal someone vulnerable and achingly human. Tyler tugged at his father's hospital gown with the urgency of children who've made important discoveries. "Dad, Chloe's mom says she owns the whole building where you got hurt. She's got a helicopter and everything." Katherine blushed at her son's casual revelation of wealth, but Ryan felt only curiosity about this woman who worked late enough to need security guards. The gap between their worlds felt impossibly wide, his cramped apartment versus her penthouse, his overdue bills versus her corporate empire. But their children bridged that distance with the effortless grace of innocence, trading stories about school and favorite cartoons as if social stratification was an adult invention that didn't apply to them. 3 months passed in a blur of physical therapy and careful friendship. Katherine had insisted on covering Ryan's medical expenses, an act of generosity that wounded his pride and saved his financial future in equal measure. She visited regularly, always bringing Chloe, always finding excuses to extend their conversations beyond polite gratitude. Ryan learned about her divorce, the custody battle that had nearly broken her, the loneliness of raising a daughter while managing a corporation that demanded every waking moment. Katherine discovered Ryan's police background, the circumstances that led to his career change, the daily struggle of single parenthood without the safety net of inherited wealth. Their children became inseparable, weekend playdates evolving into shared dinners and movie nights that felt dangerously close to family gatherings. Tyler thrived under the attention of a surrogate big sister who treated him like precious cargo rather than an inconvenience. Chloe blossomed in the warmth of a household where bedtime stories mattered more than board meetings. The adults danced around their growing attraction with the careful choreography of people who'd been hurt before. But chemistry was patient, building pressure, like steam in a kettle that would eventually demand release. Katherine's corporate world began to shift as she reprioritized her life around the miracle of Chloe's survival. Board meetings were rescheduled to accommodate school plays. Business trips were shortened to include weekend family time. Her assistant learned to recognize the difference between genuine emergencies and corporate drama that could wait until Monday. The merger had been successful, securing Reed Technologies' future. But Katherine found herself questioning what kind of future she was building if it required sacrificing the present. Watching Ryan struggle through physical therapy with Tyler cheering him on, she began to understand that strength came in forms her MBA had never taught her. Ryan's recovery progressed slowly but steadily, each milestone celebrated by an impromptu family that had formed around their shared trauma. His range of motion improved enough to throw baseballs in the park where Tyler and Chloe played, with the reckless joy of children who'd learned not to take safety for granted. Katherine surprised herself by attending these outings, trading her usual power suits for jeans and sneakers that let her chase giggling kids across playground equipment. Her manicured nails accumulated dirt and scrapes, battle wounds from a life finally being lived instead of managed. The corporate Katherine would have been horrified. The mother Katherine was finally coming alive. 6 months after the shooting, Ryan found steady work as a private investigator, his police background and heroic reputation opening doors that his injury might have otherwise closed. The pay was better than security work, the hours more flexible, and the cases occasionally challenging enough to remind him why he'd loved law enforcement. Katherine hired his firm to conduct background checks for Reed Technologies, a professional relationship that gave them excuses to meet for coffee and discuss cases that somehow always devolved into conversations about their children. The chemistry they'd been fighting finally became impossible to ignore during a late-night discussion about a particularly complex corporate investigation. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Katherine admitted over takeout Chinese food, while their children built pillow forts in the living room. The words tumbled out with the graceless honesty of someone who'd been holding them back too long. Ryan nearly choked on his lo mein, unprepared for such directness from a woman who usually approached emotion like a chess match. His response was equally blunt, delivered with the matter-of-fact sincerity that had first attracted her to him. "I've been in love with you since you cried in my hospital room." They kissed across the coffee table, strewn with case files and fortune cookies, their children cheering from the next room as if they'd been orchestrating this moment all along. The courtship that followed was careful and deliberate, two wounded people learning to trust again while navigating the complexities of blended family dynamics. Tyler and Chloe adapted with the remarkable resilience of children who wanted nothing more than for their parents to be happy. Weekend sleepovers became trial runs for cohabitation. Separate apartments evolved into shared spaces where his second-hand furniture mixed with her designer pieces in combinations that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. They learned each other's morning routines, bedtime rituals, and the 1,000 small compromises that turn romance into partnership. Katherine's penthouse gradually filled with evidence of their expanding family, Tyler's baseball trophies beside Chloe's dance recital photos, Ryan's police commendations sharing wall space with Katherine's corporate awards. The children claimed equal territory in both households, their belongings scattered like seeds taking root in soil that had been barren too long. Family dinners became sacred rituals where homework was discussed alongside corporate strategy, where bedtime stories were as important as quarterly reports. The merger of their lives proceeded with the same careful attention Katherine brought to business deals, but guided by emotional intelligence rather than profit margins. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Ryan Thompson stood in the Reed Technologies conference room where he'd almost died. The marble floor had been repaired, the walls repainted, but he could still see ghostly outlines of that terrible evening etched in his memory. Tonight, however, the space buzzed with celebration rather than violence. The Thompson Reed Family Foundation was launching its first initiative, a scholarship program for children of single parents pursuing law enforcement careers. Board members mingled with beneficiaries, their cocktail conversation punctuated by genuine laughter rather than corporate networking. Katherine worked the room with practiced elegance, her business instincts channeled toward charitable purpose. She'd restructured Reed Technologies to allow for greater work-life balance, delegating responsibilities that she'd once hoarded like a dragon guarding treasure. The company was more profitable than ever, its culture transformed by a CEO who'd learned that investing in families created stronger foundations than maximizing shareholder value. Ryan watched her navigate the crowd with pride that felt like sunlight warming his chest. The woman who'd once worked until midnight now left the office at 5:30 to attend school plays and soccer games. Tyler and Chloe posed for photographs with the scholarship recipients, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of children who'd learned that their family's tragedy had somehow created hope for others. They wore matching formal clothes, Chloe, in a navy dress that complemented Tyler's miniature suit, looking like siblings who'd been born rather than chosen. The Foundation's mission statement, framed on the conference room wall, bore both children's handprints alongside the signatures of the board members. Their involvement wasn't ceremonial. They'd helped select recipients, interview candidates, and design programs with the input that only came from living the struggles they sought to address. As the evening wound down, Ryan found himself alone with Katherine on the balcony overlooking the city where their story had begun. The lights spread below them like earthbound constellations, each illuminated window representing lives being lived, stories being written, families being formed or reformed. Katherine leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly into the hollow of his shoulder. The same shoulder that had stopped a bullet meant for her daughter. The scar was barely visible now, hidden beneath his tuxedo, but it served as a daily reminder of the night their separate worlds had collided and merged into something neither could have imagined alone. "I have something for you," Katherine said softly, producing a small velvet box that made Ryan's heart skip like a stone across water. Inside, nestled on white silk, lay his old police badge, the one that had fallen from his fingers during the shooting. But it had been transformed, mounted in gold and engraved with words that made his throat tight with emotion. "To the man who saved my daughter and taught me what courage looks like. Will you marry me?" The proposal reversed traditional gender roles with the same fearless directness she'd brought to their entire relationship. Ryan's answer came without hesitation, delivered through tears he hadn't expected, but didn't try to hide. Tyler and Chloe burst through the balcony doors like champagne exploding from a bottle, their excited squeals filling the night air with pure joy. They'd been watching from inside, their faces pressed against the glass, like puppies awaiting their owner's return. The engagement ring, a simple band that Katherine had chosen for its symbolism rather than its size, caught the city lights as she slipped it onto Ryan's finger. Their children tackled them in a group hug that threatened to topple them all over the balcony railing, laughter mixing with happy tears in the emotional cocktail of a family finally complete. The Foundation's guests gathered around them, strangers who'd become witnesses to a love story that had grown from tragedy into triumph. Cameras flashed, capturing moments that would fill photo albums and family scrapbooks for generations to come. But the real magic wasn't in the formal portraits. It was in the candid shots of children hanging on their parents' arms, of a couple who'd found each other through the worst night of their lives and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The scholarship recipients cheered their benefactor's engagement with the enthusiasm of people who understood that broken things could be made stronger when repaired with love. 12 months later, the same conference room hosted their wedding reception, a celebration that transformed the space where violence had once reigned into a temple of joy and renewal. The ceremony itself had taken place in a small church surrounded by family and friends who'd watched their courtship with the satisfaction of people witnessing destiny unfold. Tyler served as best man, his earnest recitation of the rings prompting tears from guests who remembered when he'd been a frightened boy clinging to his father's hospital bed. Chloe scattered rose petals with the precision of someone performing a sacred duty, her flower girl dress a miniature version of her mother's wedding gown. The reception menu featured comfort food rather than corporate catering. Tyler's favorite mac and cheese alongside Chloe's beloved chicken tenders. Their children's preferences honored alongside adult sophistication. The wedding cake stood 3 tiers tall, decorated with fondant figures representing their blended family. A bride and groom flanked by 2 children and a small police badge that served as the cake topper. Katherine's corporate colleagues mingled with Ryan's police academy classmates, their different worlds united by shared affection for a couple whose love story had already become legendary among their respective communities. Ryan's best man speech came from his former partner, Detective Martinez, who'd known him during his darkest days after leaving the force. "I thought we'd lost him forever," Martinez admitted to the assembled guests, his voice thick with emotion. "The job broke him, and losing his wife nearly finished what the bullet started." But watching him tonight, seeing the light back in his eyes, I realize that sometimes we have to be completely broken before we can be rebuilt into something stronger. The applause that followed wasn't polite wedding reception clapping. It was the thunderous appreciation of people recognizing profound truth delivered with uncommon honesty. Katherine's maid of honor, her college roommate, and fellow CEO, offered a different perspective on transformation. "I've known Katherine for 20 years, and I've never seen her this happy," she confessed to the crowd. She used to work 18-hour days and call it success. Now she works smart instead of hard, and she's discovered that the best merger she ever negotiated was combining her family with Ryan's. Corporate takeovers create value on paper, but this union creates something much more precious. It creates home. The speech earned standing ovation from guests who'd witnessed Katherine's evolution from workaholic to devoted wife and mother. The evening's highlight came when Tyler and Chloe performed a surprise duet, a song they'd secretly rehearsed about families that are chosen rather than born. Their young voices harmonized with the pure sweetness of children who'd learned that love multiplies rather than divides when shared generously. The lyrics, which they'd written themselves with help from their music teacher, told the story of a man who saved a little girl and discovered that heroes sometimes rescue themselves in the process. By the final chorus, there wasn't a dry eye in the conference room, including the bride and groom who held each other as their children sang their love story back to them. As midnight approached and the reception wound down, Ryan and Katherine found themselves once again on the balcony where he'd proposed. This time, they wore wedding rings that caught the city lights like promises made visible. Below them, the streets hummed with late-night traffic people heading home to their own families, their own stories, their own chances at happiness that might be just one act of courage away. The Thompson Reed family would wake up tomorrow in their shared home, children safe in beds, surrounded by the security of parents who'd learned that the strongest foundations are built on love rather than fear. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been working that night? Katherine asked, her voice soft with the philosophical mood that often follows major life events. Ryan considered the question seriously, imagining alternate timelines where their paths never crossed, where Chloe might have been lost forever and Tyler might have grown up with a father too broken to properly love him. The possibilities were too terrible to contemplate for long. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he answered finally. "People who are meant to be together always do. We just took the dramatic route." The city spread below them like a map of infinite possibilities, each light representing someone's chance at redemption, transformation, or unexpected grace. Somewhere out there, other single parents were struggling to make ends meet. Other children were falling asleep to the sound of their parents' worried conversations about money and the future. The foundation would help some of them, but it couldn't save everyone. That wasn't the point, anyway. The point was that one man's decision to act with courage instead of caution had created ripples that would spread far beyond their immediate family, touching lives they'd never know in ways they couldn't measure. Ryan's old police badge, now a permanent fixture on their refrigerator where it held up children's artwork and family photos, served as a daily reminder that heroism wasn't about wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. It was about showing up when someone needed you, especially when showing up might cost everything you had to give. The badge was tarnished now, its shine long since faded, but it had never been more valuable than the night it fell from his trembling fingers onto blood-stained marble. Sometimes the most important things we carry are the ones we're willing to let go. The foundation's work would continue long after the wedding guests had gone home and the conference room had returned to its corporate purpose. Scholarship recipients would graduate from police academies and fire departments, becoming first responders who understood that their careers were callings rather than jobs. Some would become detectives, others paramedics. Still others would choose different paths entirely, but all would carry forward the lesson that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they decide that someone else's safety matters more than their own comfort. As Ryan and Katherine finally headed inside to gather their children and begin their new life as a officially married family, the city kept spinning below them, full of stories yet to be written and heroes yet to be born. Their own story had begun with bullets and blood, terror and trauma that could have destroyed them all. Instead, it had become something beautiful, a testament to resilience, love, and the miraculous way that broken people can heal each other if they're brave enough to try. The conference room lights dimmed as the last guests departed, leaving only the ghost of celebration and the promise of tomorrow. In a few hours, the space would return to business as usual, meetings and mergers, contracts and corporate strategy. But it would forever be transformed by the memory of joy that had filled it tonight, just as the people who'd gathered there had been transformed by witnessing love triumph over fear. Some victories are measured in profit margins and market share. Others are measured in children's laughter and parents' tears of joy. Tonight had proven which kind mattered more.